Networking Podcast promotes business owners, business experts throughout the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, known as the King of Networking, connecting people from my unique communication lab in Brazil. Today we talk with Neil Mach, and he's joining us from London, England. Neil Mach is the energetic author of the Fantasy Writer's Guide, So You Want to Write Fantasy, as well as over 15 other novels. He's a popular podcaster. The Myth and Magic Show aired over 125 episodes. So Neil, what is the essential ingredient of fantasy?
Thanks, Tom. Well, maybe it's a good way to start by asking what is fantasy. And fantasy is a liminal space within the everyday architecture of life. And a liminal space or a liminal experience is a threshold experience, and we all have them.
Right.
So let me explain. When we, for example, have our first day at school or our first day at a new job, we're in a transitional phase. So we don't fit in to the school. It feels curious. It feels strange. Everybody's super nice to us. We don't understand anything about the place. We don't even know where to have lunch or what the alarm bells mean. We don't even know where to sit.
Right.
We don't know who to trust. The place even smells different and it feels different. It feels otherworldly. So we all have these experiences, these liminal experiences. You can't move forward because you have to experience it to move forward, and you can't move back. You can't go back to your old job. So you get trapped for a little while anyway, and you feel like a fish out of water, but it doesn't last long. And in a few days, you will have made real friends and you've learnt some of the rules, and you'll get over those unsettled feelings of newness. And those unsettled feelings will be replaced by real experiences and real knowledge. And then you're permitted, if you like, to leave the liminal space. And the time space of the other world is no longer otherworldly, it becomes reality. So liminal space
but what you're saying,
is the essential
real reality,
of
which is real. Fantasy is not fake. It's something that we feel.
No, it's something which is real, and we experience it. We experience it in two ways. That way I've just explained, the liminality, the feeling of being at a threshold of a moment in time, which we experience on big birthdays. The 18th or 21st is very common. We also experience it when we get our degree ceremonies. Women who are getting married in the morning recognize this feeling the night before when they are still living with their parents, but tomorrow they're going to change into a married woman. So we have these experiences, but we also have another type of liminal experience, a threshold experience, and that is in our dreams, in our dream worlds.
Right.
So so fantasy is a real part of our everyday architecture.
So to your guide, your fantasy writer's guide, which is So You Want to Write Fantasy.
Yeah.
Is that the handbook for could-be writers to write about fantasy?
Yeah, it's not. It's a book which is designed not for people to learn how to write, because there are lots of great books about how to write. It's about how to think about what fantasy actually is. So, like for example, I just talked about liminal spaces there, liminal adventures, and also because, as I just said to you, it's a threshold experience. We talk about portals because if you think about it, in very many common stories, for example, Lion, Witch and the Wardrobe, and the Alice in Wonderland tales, they go through a portal into another world. So that is the part of the liminal experience.
Right.
And often a story will launch at a important moment in that person's life, for example, a birthday. And that's how the Lord of the Rings starts. Both that and The Hobbit start on an important birthday. So we talk about some of the reasons behind fantasy rather than just how to write fantasy. And we talk about some of the myth and magic involved in fantasy adventures as well, and why our ancient people, our people before us, they created liminal adventures. So, for example, they created the Stonehenge, where people would be invited to go and see the end of winter and the beginning of summer, or they created mazes, or they created huge indoor spaces like basilicas or spooky catacombs. They did those sort of things to create liminal adventures, right? Modern people, modern creative fantasies, people who are maybe not necessarily just writing, but also creating computer games
right.
or films, they also are creating liminal adventures for their citizens. So when you go and see a picture at a movie house, that's very similar to going to Stonehenge back in the day to partake in this liminal moment.
And to your podcast, are those the subjects also? You say myth and magic show. Is that what you cover as well?
Yeah. So myth and magic. So people in the ancient people couldn't really separate fiction from fantasy. They were both the same thing. So if they told a story, even if it was a history, they would add fantasy elements to it to make it more exciting. I get that. And that's where mythology comes from. That's our mythology. So I talk about mythology and I advise people on some new mythologies which are coming out and remind them of world mythologies. And we also talk about magic and creating magic and world building when magic is involved. But we also interview people who are creatives in the fantasy world. So they may not be just fiction writers, they might be painters or they might be film directors. And we talk to them about what it's like to create fantasy for audiences.
Well, and to that point in podcasting, since we are talking on a podcast, let you relate and talk frequently and differently about the same subject.
I don't understand the question, sorry.
No, each one of your podcasts, I take, is probably unique.
Yeah, every single podcast is unique. I either discuss a particular topic or I speak to a brand new guest. And it's always about fantasy and creating fantasy and what it means to create fantasy.
So it becomes a virtual journey, right? And a continual journey around the same topic.
Yeah, that's an excellent way of explaining it. Thank you for that, because reality isn't actually what the scientists would like us to believe. A great example of that is the James Webb Telescope. We've all been watching the fantastic images that have come back from that, which have those galactic clusters existed 4.6 billion years ago, yes? Mm-hmm. I think that teaches us that reality is a transition infinite process. It's a process. It never ends. It's like a mobilized strip. And Buddhists say everything is transient, evanescent, and inconstant. Nothing ever reaches a permanent state. Everything passes through phases, and everything is frequently changing. It's always shifting. And I think that is why fantasy is so important. It's an integral part of being a human, because we've got to understand that our reality, as we are told it exists by scientists, is not necessarily a concrete thing that you can touch and hold. And we all experience that through liminal moments.
Right. Well, you help bring the fluidity, right, to life experience.
Yeah. I like that. Yeah, that's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah. So, for example, a river isn't a river. It's a state of constant flow, isn't it? Mm-hmm. A book, if you write a book, is a state of constant drafting. A sun isn't a object. It's a state of constant conflagration. And that's really what liminality and fantasy is all about. It's this constant flow of ideas and thoughts.
Very good, Neil. Well, let's keep flowing. We're coming to the end of our time. How can our audience find you wherever you're flowing?
Thank you. Well, it'd be great if they went to my website, which is Neil Mach, NeilMach.me. And if they would like to listen to the Myth and Magic show, it's Myth and Magic podcast show, and it's on all the podcast hosts.
Very good. Well, thank you again, Neil, for being part.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tom, for letting me explain.
All right. And for our audience, again, it's Neil Mach, Neil, the last name Mach, M-A-C-H. You also find him on LinkedIn and the neilmach.me, neilmach.me, as well as the Myth and Magic podcast show. So thanks for being part. Café and Networking is brought to us by Focus MI Market Intelligence, an agricultural market research specialist in Brazil. More information at focusmi.com. Thanks for listening until the next time here at Café and Networking Podcast.